Hi all, I'm Taru. I'm a part of the Code Stack team. We were recently invited at the Participatory AI Research Symposium to present our approach towards strengthening natural resource management in rural India. I'll be presenting that piece of work here. So the tech stack that we're building, Core Stack, Commoning for Resilience and Equality, aims to bring the power of geospatial AI for climate change adaptation directly to the end beneficiaries, in our case, the rural communities in India. So let's dive into some of our insights grounded in the practicalities of building the system. Between 2022 to 2024, when we set out to understand how natural resources like water, land, and forests are managed by rural communities, we came across many such instances um, with water structures like wells and farm ponds being dried up, validating how rural India is the worst hit in terms of poor water security. India has about 18% of world's population, but is dependent on only about 4% of freshwater resources. Now, given this huge demand supply gap, sustainable and equitable means of managing water resources becomes very crucial because rural livelihoods are heavily dependent on them. However, we found that participation in decision making for managing natural resources may not be always equitable. Women and people from vulnerable caste groups might get sidelined. We also realized that even though geospatial science can make assessments for building water structures at a particular site more accurate, data driven planning is not yet accessible to community representatives or the frontline workers who typically lead natural resource management. Uh, for example, consideration of land features like lineaments would have hinted that this particular site is a poor site for farm pond construction, but it was not considered in this case, incurring to a huge monetary investment with poor returns. Moreover, there needs to be a shared understanding of operating within the ecological limits of a landscape so that we are not exploiting, let's say, groundwater more than we are replenishing it. Poor collectivization within the communities can, for instance, lead to such exploitation. Now, how does climate action actually take place in rural India? There's a scheme called NREGA, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the biggest social welfare scheme in the world, which operates on a twin principle of employment and climate sustainability. It enables bottom up demand generation for natural resource management to promote construction of durable assets, making rural communities climate resilient and generating additional wages for them through the construction of these assets. But it does not directly translate to sustainability and equity focused demands from the community. Field functionaries, known as community representatives or landscape stewards, play a very central role in making that happen. They connect government schemes to community needs through consultations and mapping of common resources. Um, and their efforts are directed to achieve collective decision making in the community so as to unlock both sustainable and equitable management of the natural commons. So, can data, especially geospatial AI-based data, strengthen this process further? What potential does geospatial science hold for these landscape stewards who lead climate action on the ground? For a stronger accountability between government and citizens, geospatial data-driven site suitability assessments can potentially help validate community demands, and the digitization of the entire process can allow people to hold government decisions accountable. Similarly, there is also potential for geospatial data to provide landscape assessments in ways that surface the ecological limits of the landscape and the resource equity issues so that we move towards cooperating with the land and with each other. So, keeping these values at the core, we launched Commons Connect, which is a mobile based application facilitating data driven participation and demand generation for natural resource management. It was piloted in 2023 and is targeted towards the landscape stewards. So, what does the tool really do, and why are we discussing it here in the context of participation and AI? Um, this is the typical workflow of Commons Connect. The stewards start with resource mapping. So they map all the natural resources in the given village, assessing the state, assessing their health and state, whether they need any maintenance, the kind of communities that they're serving. Then they move to asset planning. So they collectively discover the different stress patterns in a village, let's say depleting groundwater levels, and accordingly plan for water structures. Could be groundwater recharge structures, irrigation infrastructures, plantations, depending on the kind of issues that the communities are facing. All the data that they map, assess, record is then automatically converted into a digital detailed project report, which they can then review with the community and submit to higher authorities for review. So what you see on the screen is an example of how geospatial AI-based data can build a shared understanding of natural resources as commons. So the data on cropping pattern can trigger conversations on groundwater use and reveal an insight such as areas with high cropping intensity, also being areas where people find depth to water in wells worsening over the years. Another example that comes to my mind is a dried up water body, which might get shown on the app, and nudge the community to revive it or propose a water harvesting structure at the same place because that area has a water holding capacity. People can also visualize their hyperlocal data, such as caste-wise access to water resources overlaid on cropping pattern. So here in the image, we see a bunch of settlements or colonies in the village, which are often segregated based on caste. We see some settlements having good access to these water structures, some with very poor water infrastructure. Similarly, these yellow icons represent structures which need maintenance. So during community consultations, issues linked with equity, poor maintenance of resources, and low awareness on relevant schemes get surfaced. What I also noted during the field visits, during my field visits, was that it is generally difficult for the landscape stewards to trigger conversations on resource equity because either members from vulnerable caste communities are absent or they're unable to voice their opinions in the meeting. Um, After using Commons Connect, a member from one of our partner organizations mentioned that the mix of geospatial and field survey data shown in the app speaks for vulnerable caste communities. For example, this is a settlement with a higher proportion of vulnerable caste communities having access to just two wells and their land cover being predominantly forests. And this is a settlement with a relatively better off caste community dominance, access to multiple public and private resources. They're able to do cropping twice in a year, and the number of crop cycles can, of course, be one of the markers for income levels. So once this data advocates for members from tribal communities, which have been historically marginalized, they're able to voice their opinions during the planning discussions. The app also provides decision support for assessing the suitability of a site for groundwater recharge and harvesting structures, so that communities account for technical evaluation while demanding something along with their own knowledge. And they also have data backing up their demands when they present it to the higher authorities. Finally, all the proposed demands linked to soil and water conservation, horticulture, livestock health are integrated into a detailed project report, which can be shared with the citizens and presented to government authorities. So trust and accountability can improve through digital record keeping. We have observed that whether all the demands get approved or not, the community now has a mechanism to track their proposed demands year on year. There's a due process that's followed, right? Geotagging, community consultations, demand justification, and then generation of digital reports. One of the participants told me how the community now entrusts her with stewardship roles since Commons Connect enables her to treat them as decision makers and not just data providers. In her words, when we show people data on changing land cover, cropping practices, and water balance, It adds a flavor of preciseness to conversations on climatic changes. People are becoming more aware of assets that they can demand because the app provides information on that. Moreover, when their data on livelihoods and resource access is converted into visualizations over geospatial maps in real time, it gives them a sense of confidence that we are here to talk about problems and solutions both, rather than just a tokenistic collection of data. So, what does participation mean in the context of Commons Connect, which integrates geospatial AI outputs with localized data for natural resource management? What I just described in the previous few slides is about participation through AI, where the geospatial data strengthens the participation between different stakeholders on the ground. And now I'll be talking about participation in designing this AI system. So, what processes we followed in designing Commons Connect. We ensure that all our team members, whether engineers, machine learning researchers, founders, designers, go to the field so we all understand the way of living of the communities we work with. We conducted multiple field visits between 2022 to 2024 to understand how NREGA functions, what is the role of landscape stewards, what might enhance climate sustainability, resource equity, and state citizen accountability, and what is the current maturity of using geospatial data in planning. Ever since we launched our app, we have also been holding regular feedback sessions and iterating over our design, fixing bugs, handholding partners as they integrate the tool into their workflows. For example, we've organized about 3 workshops, bringing together civil society organizations, technologists, public policy researchers to take CoRE forward. We also hold these monthly community of practice sessions to enable consistent cross learning of different themes linked to climate action in India. Our general flow is testing, piloting, and scaling. So we first test the relevance and potential of Commons Connect at a location along with an NGO embedded there. We then pilot the tool and accordingly plan for its scale up in that location. As we noted earlier, the communities are feeding their localized data, such as their demographic details, resource ownership and dependency, livelihoods, etc., on the app. And it is the integration of this primary data along with secondary geospatial data that really drives the decisions. And this is important because there are limits to pre-computed data, and algorithm will not be able to detect the health of a well and whether it requires maintenance. It doesn't know which communities are dependent on a particular well. Similarly, we take community inputs to enrich geospatial data. We might be able to detect computationally that there is a farm at this location, but has there been a shift towards more cash crops in this farm? Is something that the community would know best. And the core feature of Commons Connect is to allow the community to contest the data shown. So we acknowledge that data can be erroneous and we rely on community to provide ground truth data. The stewards using the app also contest the accuracy of data shown on the app. For example, an area our algorithm marked as double cropping might actually be barren. So we acknowledge the limits of remotely sensed data, and the people using the app know that they need to prioritize their own knowledge over what is shown on the app. And I think that's very important. There are certainly limits to what we want and don't want AI to do. We don't want to reduce participation by automating the workflows. So we're not using the AI system to also deliver recommendations on what can be done. It's not an advisory system per se. People are collectively engaging with the data and then taking decisions based on their own wisdom. AI in our context cannot become a scapegoat to avoid accountability. Similarly, we don't want the communities to foster blind trust on AI outputs. In a sense, we are building towards more participation and less AI. We've also definitely had challenges in building the entire stack. Participatory design by nature is complex. A lot of time and labor is invested by the end beneficiaries, and we need to continuously manage their expectations because there are inherent limitations of technology. The continuous adaptation of the tool to the needs of diverse users also becomes difficult because the landscapes of different states vary a lot. Their requirements and expectations from such a tool vary too. Landscape steward, our intended user, is also not just one persona. Their role differs in terms of the thematic area that they work on, the prior experience that they have working with an NGO, financial incentives provided to them by their organization. Similarly, we also need to engage in building capacity on not just using the app, but also making sense of geospatial science. But yes, we have been able to steer through a lot of these challenges given this very thriving collaborative network that CoreStack is a product of. Till date, we have about 20 civil sector organizations who have partnered with us. Commons Connect is currently operational in about 1,300 villages, and 300 landscape stewards now trust Commons Connect with natural resource management in their areas. So yes, with that, thank you.